Hello, I'm Yonit Levy of Channel 12 in Tel Aviv.
And I'm Jonathan Friedland of The Guardian in London.
And we are Unholy, two Jews on the news from Keshet Podcast. Well, that last episode kind of blew up, Jonathan.
It kind of did. I was just going to say, so what have we been doing the last few days? You tweeted out a sample of the clips of Barak Ravid's conversation with Donald Trump that was exclusively on Unholy last week. And I think it was thousands and thousands and thousands of retweets, and that prompted news coverage kind of everywhere. I mean, CNN and the Washington Post and Vanity Fair and the New York Times, everybody, The Guardian, everybody covered it, all based on what we heard out of the mouth of the former president.
Yes, it was. It was quite a week. It's an interesting thing that Barak had two big stories, right? One was the F him about Netanyahu, and the other was really the outrageous things he said about American Jews. And in Israel, it was interesting to note that the first made the huge headlines here. It shattered the illusion, that Netanyahu and Donald Trump were two peas in a pod. And the second one, the latter, about American Jews, made much less headlines. And I think we can talk a little bit about that gap. I don't think that Israelis don't care about American Jews or what he said about them. But it was like, okay, first of all, we kind of felt like he's not in the political arena anymore. Netanyahu feels like he still is. So when he comes back, we're going to deal with all of that stuff. So it kind of made, there was a discrepancy between both headlines, I have to say.
I think it's so interesting that because it may be the very reverse dynamic at play outside Israel, but especially America, where it may be that news editors in America think, well, Netanyahu's the former prime minister, so it's not that big a story anymore. But Donald Trump is very much the nominee designate for the Republican Party for 2024. He's not just the last president, he may be the next one. And so anything he says is still news. I happen to think Donald Trump's one of those people who kind of, even if that wasn't true, he's just news because he's so incendiary. But there is still a kind of currency to what he says. So, it's one of those classic illustrations of the thing that you and I have been talking about on this podcast throughout the year, which is just how things look inside Israel and outside and how they are different. Because inside Israel, it was all about the Israel bit, which is Netanyahu, and outside Israel, it was about the Jewish bit and his comments about Jews.
Yeah, I mean, it's even more than that. As you said, our founding idea was to bridge the divide, or at least, let's be honest, talk about the divide, right, between a diaspora Jew, you are that representative, an Israeli Jew, I'm supposed to represent them. I can't even represent myself, but you know what I mean. And the concept is, let's talk where we agree and where we disagree, and what binds us and what divides us. And Donald Trump is that sort of embodiment, the physical embodiment of the divide. It's amazing when you think about it for a moment. When you look at an estimated 77% of Jewish voters in the U.S. voted for Joe Biden. When you look at the polls in Israel, right, Israelis were asked before the elections, do you support Biden or do you support Trump? The polls were almost the exact mirror image. Something like 68%, depending on the polling, right, but 68% to 77% said they support Trump. And this is incredible, especially in light of what we've heard and what he says about Jews. Now, I seem to think that it's not because Israelis ignore who he is or don't know what he's saying, but that they're urgent, right? It's the constant urgent versus the important. It's important to him what he's saying about Jews, and they don't agree with it. But it's urgent for them to have a president that stands by Israel and stands for Israel's security. And a lot of Israelis saw him as this person, whereas the Iran deal now, it's a very different story the way Israelis look at it. But then, of course, the issue with the Palestinians and the Abraham Accords. There's a quote, Jonathan, that kind of runs through my head, and it connects to last week. I remember once an Israeli official said to me in a conversation between us, he said, when Trump was president, we felt like we were sitting in first-class seats on a plane. Somewhere in the back of our minds, we knew that there's a possibility that the pilot can land the plane, but we had all the perks of a first-class, seat. So that is a little bit, that was a long-winded way of saying that is how Israel saw Trump while he was president.
I know, I like that. And I think that distinction between urgent and important is so interesting. It's as if a president who is humane and enlightened in his attitude to Jews is a luxury that Israelis can't necessarily afford. That the important point is that he's in Israel's corner, and the rest is extra and luxurious. And some of the commentary that's come out since our podcast last week has made this point that some of the most pro-Israel presidents, Harry Truman, Richard Nixon, did have anti-Jewish remarks on the record in their back catalogue.
Even Nixon, I think, very similar to what Trump said.
I mean, this was our friend David Remnick of The New Yorker brought this out, and it's funny because it was one of those things that I knew that the Trump tape recordings and the sound of Trump talking on Barak Ravid's tape recorder struck a familiar echo, and I couldn't put my finger on exactly what it was, but David Remnick did, and he remembered that there were hours and hours and hours of tapes from the Nixon White House that became public, and on tape, among all the expletives that were later deleted, was Richard Nixon saying to his chief of staff, "The Jews are all over the government, and what's more, most Jews are disloyal." And then there's Donald Trump saying that Jews or Israel used to have absolute power over Congress, and then also saying that they don't like and don't care about Israel, and that they somehow are disloyal. So the echo is really, really direct. I have found, that difference that you've been talking about between how Israelis react and how Jews react is just fascinating. It's one of our themes on the podcast. You know that Israelis are from Mars and American or diaspora Jews are from Venus, and that sort of Rorschach test of how you look at Donald Trump so brings that out, where, as you say, essentially it's 3-1 American Jews opposed Trump and 3-1 Israeli Jews or more supported him. It's an absolute mirror image. The one exception, which is interesting just because Donald Trump himself mentioned it, are Orthodox Jews in America who were in Trump's corner and are not signed up for the very liberal, and we know most American Jews are not just liberal, they are kind of ultra-liberal on social questions. The group who are not signed up for that are religious and Orthodox Jews, and they are a potential, in our ongoing conversation, you and me, and Israel and the diaspora, they are a really interesting potential bridge because they're a little bit Israeli in their attitudes. And so they are the little bit of the Venn diagram where the two circles overlap, perhaps. So that's interesting. The conversation as well about whether or not, the diaspora one, the American one, about whether these remarks prove Donald Trump's an anti-Semite or not. I have found that very interesting. But, it's an argument that's raged before, but it's happened now with a kind of new focus with these comments. And it's amazing, really, that the comments made and heard on this podcast have become the sort of central text of this big argument, is or is not Donald Trump an anti-Semite? Look,
again, the argument, as you said, was reignited. And I was focusing, I think there's a lot to say about that, by the way. I think that is the danger, right, is the right question to ask here. Is he an anti-Semite, or is the danger of what he's saying is enabling and true anti-Semites to come forth, right? The problem, I think, many Israelis, after saying everything I said, had, was the fact that it seemed like the way he speaks and his anti-establishment motto brings forth or allows for groups to come that shouldn't have seen the light of day, and in normal, political climate would never see the light of day. And he wasn't at all quick enough to sort of throw these extreme groups off his back. That was, I think, very concerning. It was concerning for Israelis as well. Jonathan, I kind of thought about what he talked about the evangelicals, right? They love Israel more than the Jews do. And it made me think about, which is, of course, a terrible thing to say, but it made me think about, what happened to us? What happened to Jews, and what happened to the divide? Because if we're honest with ourselves for a second, isn't it true that a right-wing religious settler in Israel feels more at home and more comfortable in a conversation with an evangelical Christian? Isn't it true, if we admit to ourselves, that a liberal from Tel Aviv will feel more comfortable in a conversation with a non-Jew liberal from New York, and not with an Orthodox Jew from Brooklyn? So that the political divide became more important than religious, than ethnicity, than, that the bond that is supposed to bind us as Jews around the world. And is that reversible at all? And Trump, like any good populist, has a little bit of truth, and the rest is a lot of hot air, maybe. But he speaks about that divide, again, in an outrageous way. And what are we supposed to do, again, as, the people who host this podcast and brought it to life, to somehow mend that? I don't have answers. I mean, my God, we're Jews. We just have questions. It's just a question I have.
I think it's such an interesting question. And the idea that a Jew from Park Slope has, or a Jew in Tel Aviv, a liberal Jew, has more in common with a non-Jewish liberal in Park Slope, Brooklyn. In other words, Martians have more in common with other Martians, and Venusians have more in common with other Venusians, rather than them being Jewish. And I think that is a real issue. And if that divide existed, by the way, I don't think this was Donald Trump's intention at all. But if that divide exists,
or his invention, by the way,
well,
right?
What I was going to say is he absolutely puts a wedge. He puts a wedge right in that divide. Mm-hmm. These remarks of his to
he is the wedge.
He is. I mean, he drives such a wedge between Israeli Jews and American Jews, between liberal Jews and conservative Jews. They divide, perfectly along the lines of support or opposition to his remarks. He is such a polarizing figure, but that's something that I think the point you make is very strong. I think it really has caused a rift, or revealed a rift, between Israelis and Americans, to the point where their Jewishness as a bond is perhaps weaker than their political identity. Mm-hmm. And this is a thing that people have noticed about Trump, is that he has made your partisan affiliation almost the most important fact about you. And we've mentioned before this extraordinary thing that the best predictor of whether you've had the vaccine or not in America is whether you voted for Donald Trump or Joe Biden. That your partisan political affiliation becomes your key tribe.
I just want to, while we wind up our conversation, just understand, I'm from Mars and you're from Venus, or you're from Mars and I'm from Venus. Just make sure in this whole metaphor.
In this metaphor, Israelis are from Mars.
Okay, cool.
Because they are bellicose and belligerent, Yonit, and Venusians like me are in the diaspora. What do Venusians even look like? I have no idea. But anyway, we're meant to be softer and cuddlier and touchier and feelier. That's the cliche and the metaphor. Anyway, it was a thrill for us because the word from Unholy went out into the wider world. And became the subject of this really engaged and international conversation. So here we are again talking about Donald Trump. I make the case that it's highly defensible, given he may well not just be the former president, but he may be the next president of the United States. But he is, in a sense, the gift that keeps on giving, which brings us very nicely to this season of gift giving. And that is, well, I'm sort of almost hesitating to say the word because for a long time, even in my own family, it was a bit of a taboo. But a season is upon us that at least one member of my family used to refer to as Kratzmach, rather than actually say the word Christmas. But it is Christmas, Yoni. It is here. What do we feel about that?
I'm Israeli. I don't care.
You just don't care. I mean, I want to find out about this because before I plunge in with my evolving journey in attitudes to the festival that is looming and more or less upon us, I want to know how much of a non-event Christmas is in Israel. And I ask that because we know there are Christians who live in Israel, obviously in territory Israel occupies, namely Bethlehem. It's very significant. Jesus' birthplace, Nazareth, is part of Israel. Is Christmas a total non-event or just mainly a non-event in Israel?
Well, first of all, Christmas is a mainly non-event in Israel, if I can be honest. I mean, let's say this. You said there are Christians in Israel. There are about 200,000 Christians in Israel. Most of them are Arab Christians. So in the cities that inside the country that pride themselves on coexistence, right? The Haifa more than anything, and probably Jerusalem in the Christian quarter. You will see some celebrations, right? But it becomes tourist attraction. But sure, you have to say we are all at work. There is no vacation, right? I mean, this is not at all the way it looks in anywhere else in the world. And you mentioned Bethlehem, of course, which is the city itself is under Palestinian authority, but Israel rules most of the territories. If I want to see a midnight mass in Bethlehem, I can't because it's Area A. But most of the people who are devout pilgrims or want to come from Ramallah, from Gaza, from anywhere else for the rest of the world, that's not going to happen this year. They can do that. They need an authorization, but they can go. As a short answer to your question, Jonathan, it is more sort of folklore, is more a tourist attraction. It doesn't happen here in a huge way, for sure. And it is the land of Jesus Christ, so that's kind of ironic when you think about it.
So Christmas is a non-event in the Holy Land, so-called. The bit that I wondered about was actually, Tel Aviv especially, hugely international city. We know it's the land of high-tech and startups and everything. People who will be dealing with Europe and particularly America, did those people not feel like work is beginning to wind down because, they won't be able to get hold of people in New York until the new year, January? Or or Israelis are just turning up for work as if nothing's going on in the rest of the world?
Everyone's going to work. Maybe they have less conversations with the Western world, but everyone is at work for sure. I mean, it's a funny thing. We always talk about Jewish holidays, where here it's the biggest thing and everyone is celebrating, and over there it's the minority, right, that is celebrating. Yes. And here it's just a mirror image of it, isn't it?
Yeah, it's true. And when you said 200,000 Christians, and I was thinking, there's roughly 250,000 Jews in Britain. It's like there's a little mirror image there. Okay, so
right.
About attitudes that I would have as the member of a minority community in this country at Christmas time. And I said I've evolved. It is quite true that, if you take the long sweep of my family, my beloved great aunt, who was the most religious and devout member of my family, Auntie Yiddi, she was known as Yehudit, but Yiddish in Yiddish, she would literally not say the word. And it was Kratzmach only, which is a sort of bowdlerized, Yiddishized version. I think my mother adopted that as well. Certainly there was a thing about writing Xmas, so you didn't actually mention the name of you-know-who, or didn't write it down. I still sort of do that. I tell myself it's because it's briefer. But I think it is. But, it's a shorthand. And for a long time, Christmas was truly a non-event. In
like consciously a non-event. Like you ignored it consciously.
Consciously non-event.
But is it because generally, like the family didn't want to, because if you celebrate or somehow participate, or the Hanukkah bush or whatever way some families used to have to sort of participate, then it's the danger of assimilation? Or is it just because, we can't celebrate or participate in any way the celebration of the birth of the man that in his name terrible things were done to Jews? Where do you put that kind of...
Very good. So definitely both.
Okay.
And I like your use of the word danger, because there was fear around it that if you started a little bit of tinsel, some holly appeared, who knows where it would end.
It's a slippery slope.
It's a slippery slope, and it would lead eventually to, assimilation. And how interesting, actually, that the Hanukkah story, which comes so close to Christmas, is all about it's not a genocidal threat, as Dara Horn told us a couple of weeks ago. It's not about that. That's Purim. The Hanukkah threat is of assimilation and cultural disappearance. And that was seen as a great fear, that who knows where this would start. So yes, there's a bit of the religious, the theological element, and I know there will be unholy listeners who will nod at this next bit, which is if you didn't go to a Jewish school and there was the carol singing or hymns, the Jewish kids might sing along to a bit but then mute themselves. They would put themselves on mute when the word Jesus or even more Christ came up. They would skip that word but sing the rest of the carol. And there are carols, there are a lot of banging tunes there. So Jewish kids would like to sing them, but they would...
So I have to ask if you ever did that.
I completely did do that. And you would sing along, belting out the little Christmas carols, Silent Night, Holy Night, whatever. But when it came to Jesus or, I'm even now hesitating, or the word Christ, mute button, you felt as if somehow your rabbi, God wouldn't be too angry with you because you hadn't sung the Christian bit. That is seared into my memory, actually.
That's amazing. And the other amazing thing is that you didn't go to Jewish school. I heard you correctly?
You heard that right. I never once went to Jewish school. I thought you knew that already.
No, first of all, I'm surprised that I didn't know this. But secondly, it means I have more years of Jewish school and diaspora than you. Do you understand the huge paradox here?
That is a head explode moment, because of course you did go to a Jewish school in Chicago, I think, right? And Shea Med Jewish Day School, so I never had to sing the Christmas carols. Right, so you don't have this experience.
Although I did find myself, my mother says that I did find myself saying that Jews are the people who don't have Christmas when I was in first grade.
Oh,
so I kind of knew where the difference is.
And you still felt, and did you feel sad about it even then as a little girl?
I think so. I think I said it out of, kind of envy and yes, I mean that this is a family story.
Yeah,
but I can feel like a better Jew for a few minutes because I did go to Jewish school in diaspora.
You can definitely out-Jew me on that, and that's. I'm just now thinking of this is not a Christmas song. The Guides and Dolls, which was on TV in the lead up to Christmas here, and so sue me, you can out-Jew me. This is where we're going. But which reminds me, of course, wow. I mean, that is such a Jewish show. And there are, of course, Jewish fingerprints all over the songs that are sung at Christmas, just not the carols. So if at my school we'd sung, we'd channeled Bing Crosby and sung I'm Dreaming of a White Christmas by Irving Berlin, that would have been fine. I think I would have known instinctively that was kosher, but I couldn't do that. So no, that was the thing. I missed out. Now I was, and yet I didn't feel the kind of envy you're describing, which is interesting. There was no tree, no tinsel in the Friedland family household, certainly no turkey. There was no acknowledgement really that Christmas was happening. And Christmas Day, it's funny now to say, but my parents used to use it kind of logistically. My parents had a little holiday flat in Bournemouth by the seaside, which tries to think of itself as a kind of British, Anglo-Jewish Miami. It really isn't, but there isn't the weather. But they would go there, and Christmas Day would often be the day we would drive down, and lunchtime. We would drive down when the rest of the country was having Christmas lunch. No, we were in our own little sealed bubble on wheels, Christmas-free zone, driving to the coast.
So they planned it. They were smart parents. They planned it that way.
I think so. Maybe there was something deliberate there. And for years and years and years, that was the way I did it too.
Wow. And, I'm thinking when you were talking about this, somehow I have the image of the play that we both saw and enjoyed, Tom Stoppard's Leopoldstadt, and the Jewish family in Vienna in the turn of the 20th century. And the opening scene, right, where there's some sort of intermarriage there between Christians and Jews. And the opening scene is this huge Christmas tree in their house. And the little boy tries to put the Star of David on top of the tree, right? When we're talking about those dangers of assimilation and what, the imagery is very stark there.
Oh, it's so well. I mean, that really was a brilliant opening, actually. And it leapt out at me at the same time because I thought, in a way, we know as the audience, don't we, why that's poignant is, of course, where it's going to end for that family. And, I felt that was kind of Tom Stoppard channeling, in a way, the spirit of my great aunt, Auntie Yiddy, an unlikely combination, Tom Stoppard and her. But in a way it was because her view was that with great sort of foreboding, that if you go down this road of Christmas, then before you know it, it's assimilation, and that never ends well. And in a way, Tom Stoppard, obviously from a completely different angle, but the play that has poignance, doesn't it, in the opening of that play, because we know what they don't know, that this hope they have that somehow the two can be brought together, Christmas and Hanukkah, whatever, it's not going to happen.
It's not going to work. So what happened to the Friedland family? What changed?
Well, over time, we did sort of, not my parents. I don't think they really did change at all on this subject. But bring up my own children who did go to Jewish schools, who knew all the Hanukkah songs, and just little by little, I found that when in the lead up to Christmas, I would be listening to the Sinatra Christmas album. We'd have that playing in the kitchen, and a couple of times I have attended a Christmas carol performance because the songs are lovely and it was atmospheric, and I didn't feel, and this is the key thing I think, I didn't feel sort of threatened by it anymore. It didn't feel like something like I felt when I was muting out the words, that it would somehow diminish my Jewish identity, that it would erode my Jewish identity. And it turns out it's not just me. I mean, I did once write a piece on this, and made a call to a kosher butcher who reported that they had this huge run of orders for turkey, kosher turkey, in late December. And what was interesting about that was these were not assimilated Jews. These were Jews who are still Jewish enough to want to eat.
Keeping kosher.
Exactly, to keep kosher. But nevertheless, they thought, why not? Everyone else is having a turkey lunch or dinner. We live in this country and it doesn't make us any less Jewish. It's not, there's nothing Christian about it. It's just a lovely time of year, and why not? And the key bit of...
And everyone else is...
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly the thing. Everyone else is the key bit because, when you and I talked about Yom Kippur in Israel, the appeal is that, it's that one time when everyone else is also not working. And there's something lovely about that when, the kids cycling on the highway.
Yeah. Well, unless you're working with a nagging Israeli and doing a podcast. So she's going to be calling you on Christmas, dragging you to do a Christmas episode. But besides that, everyone else is on vacation.
Yes, I mean, you're letting a little bit of daylight in upon magic there because you're revealing to our listener that we did have some discussion where I very tentatively tried to say, maybe we should have the next 2 weeks off like everyone else. And you said, well, not here. In Israel, everyone's working. These are normal working days.
If I'm working, you're working, Friedland. Yeah, it was a spirited,
Exactly.
I think it was more a spirited debate than a discussion. We have to say something about Christmas films. Your favorite?
Yeah, absolutely we do. And this, by the way, is all part of that lead up. So I mentioned the Sinatra music. From the moment our kids were very little, and actually it was a Christmas we had outside London. We rented a little cottage and snow did fall. It was actually a white Christmas. And we saw for the first time, and it's now become our Christmas minchag, we saw the Muppet Christmas Carol. I love the Muppets anyway, but I think the Muppets are the absolute peak of their powers. The Muppet Christmas Carol is just a work of art. We have great admiration for the novel, but the Muppet Christmas Carol as a film is a sublime treat and a joy. And we still do it. My kids are now, 20 and 17, but we still will sit down, and watch a Muppet Christmas Carol.
So Kermit trumps Charles Dickens, is what you say?
Well, he takes Charles Dickens to a whole new level. Yes. What about you, Yonit? Do you have a Christmas movie, or are you?
I do.
Such a Christmas freezer. You do.
Die Hard. It's surprising. I don't like action films usually. I can't deal with the violence, but this is really the peak of its genre, and it's beautiful, and it's a great film. Even 33 years later, it's still a perfect. It's perfect film. I know there's this argument whether it is or not a Christmas film. A, I don't care. I'm Jewish. B, it happens at Christmas. There are Christmas songs in the soundtrack. It's a Christmas. They had to ask Justin Trudeau this week, the Prime Minister of Canada, if Die Hard is indeed a Christmas film. I don't know. Maybe they ran out of questions, but he said it is. So that's enough of an authority for me. It's a good film.
Good. All right. Here's where I, with some embarrassment, admit that I've actually never seen that film. No. And I'm aware of the debate. So now I will add that to the pile of Christmas viewing. It is a very steep pile already because I've already told you about Muppet Christmas Carol being compulsory. There are two more Christmas films which have also we feel as if we sort of obliged to see and we love. One is, of course, It's a Wonderful Life, which is a huge tradition, particularly in America, to watch that
Perfect film. Perfect.
It is a perfect film. I mean, I just love it and find new depths in it every time. I would argue that it's a legitimate talking point on Unholy because I think there's something very Jewish about the exercise that George Bailey, played by Jimmy Stewart, goes through, which is... It's a kind of cheshbon nefesh there, where he is accounting. It's an accounting of the soul. It's sort of maybe it should be a Yom Kippur movie rather than a Christmas movie.
It is rather dark, isn't it? I mean, it's surprising.
It's very
this
dark,
film.
Yeah. Well, it's just the person is forced to think, what would the world be like? My family, but the world be like if I wasn't in it? And there's a real focus to that exercise. There is something sort of spiritual about that exercise, and that's what the film's about. So that is in there. And then much less dark is a latecomer to the Friedland Christmas Film Club is Elf with Will Ferrell, which I came to, as I say, very late, but my kids love, we love. So if we can get all three in, we feel we've done very well.
So you got all three. So I'm pushing Die Hard a little bit. But I'm only forcing
It's
you to watch
four.
the first one, because there's this joke a few years ago. Bruce Willis was roasted on Comedy Central, and someone said, he's now filming Die Hard 6 Natural Causes. So, so you don't have to see the 2, 3, 4. Just see the first. It's fine. I'll forgive you. Just
now, talking of traditions, we have our own unholy minchagim and customs to observe, and one of them is that we do give out awards with chutzpah and mensch. But I think you've got a little addition, which in chutzpahdik style you want to slip in there.
Exactly. I thought maybe we could, 'tis the season, so maybe the Scrooge Awards before the chutzpah award, and I have to give that to Eric Clapton. I mean, really, who won a lawsuit against a German widow who tried to sell a bootleg of his performance, bootleg CD of his performance for $11 on eBay. He sued her and won $4,000 or something in legal fees. I just, I think a rule of thumb in life, don't sue your fans. You have much more money. Just don't do it unless, she's Kathy Bates and your James Caan film is Misery. Don't sue your fans. So he gets the Scrooge Award.
Don't sue your fans.
Yep.
And well, if you've got fans, then don't sue them. I think that's a very good recipient for that. So I'm going to hand out the Chutzpah Awards, and we sort of end where we began a bit with Donald Trump, alongside Bill O'Reilly of Fox News. They were on a TV show, and just as a kind of casual aside, mentioned that they'd both been double vaccinated and both had the booster. Which struck me as kind of chutzpah, given they sit atop a sort of news media world that is really anti-vax, and in fact embodied by another chutzpah award recipient or contender, former Alaska governor, former vice presidential candidate Sarah Palin, who came back into the news this week saying that she would have a vaccine over her dead body. She would not be vaccinated. Wow. So adding weight to this anti-vax movement, which I know
actually could not be a metaphor, by the way, if she doesn't get vaccinated. Just saying. Okay.
Yes, it could. That's right. I mean, it drives me to distraction. These people who, the Trump and O'Reilly thing is awful because there's this whole world of people who are anti-vax publicly, but quietly, privately go and get the vaccine. And then there's people like Sarah Palin who, are encouraging people to not do something which is so vital for their health. So chutzpah awards aplenty heading their way. Completely.
And now mensch for Christmas. Yes. What could be, I think, Jonathan, more perfect than two Jews who host a podcast named Unholy, giving the Mensch Award on Christmas to the Pope? I think, we can equally annoy everyone.
And is that just generally for being a great guy, which I'm a big fan of Pope Francis.
Hey,
very happy.
Specific reason.
What's the reason we're giving it to him?
He was on Italian television on Tuesday saying men who commit violence against women engage in something satanic, which is not only true, but very important that the Pope himself is vocal about it. The Pope, Pope Francis, has been quite revolutionary in the Catholic Church when it comes to issues of homosexuality and of abortion. I think more people expect him to be a little more forward-thinking when it comes to women's rights. He said women are never going to be Catholic priests, but still this fact that he spoke up, I think we can give him the Mensch Award for Christmas, don't you think?
It is quite something, isn't it? The idea of us handing out awards to the Pope. Somewhere in a parallel universe, there are two Catholic journalists presenting two Catholics on the news, and they are handing out this week's Chutzpah Award to us for having the chutzpah to enlist the Pope. And Your Holiness, if you feel this is a chutzpah too far, do feel free to get in touch yourself. We are at Two Jews on Instagram. We would love to hear from you. And if you've enjoyed the podcast, Your Holiness, remember you can rate us or review us wherever you get your podcasts. You can do that. And if you're not the Pope, please also do the same. We are always grateful for those recommendations.
And I will add, Merry Christmas, sir, because I went to a Jewish school, so I can say that to the Pope, whereas you might be you'll mute yourself from saying that. Let's say thank yous. First of all, Jonathan, thank you for being dragged into the Christmas episode, although you are on vacation. And thank you to Lior Friedman as well, and Irad Eshel. All of them supposed to be on vacation. And Rom Atik and Omer Primat are here with me, so they're just doing their day job. But thank you to them as well. And happy holidays, Jonathan. And we shall meet next week.
Happy holidays to you, Yonit. See you next time.